Hey guys, what's up? It's Brian here, and today I wanted to take some time to talk about the GMAT. So a few months ago, I wanted to apply to graduate school. I wanted to pursue an MBA after getting my degree in computer science, and thought that it might be worth applying to some 2+2 programs in which I work for 2 years and then I go to school for 2 years and get my degree. In that process, of course, one of the biggest first hurdles is taking the GMAT, the General Management Admissions Test. And I hadn't taken a standardized test since, of course, high school, but I recall that standardized tests were pretty hackable in a way. They followed some rigid routine structure. The questions were all able to be studied for, and you would see almost exactly what to expect on the test. And as long as you mimic the testing conditions, you could generally score decently. And I'm not good at tests. I had test anxiety all throughout college. I failed a lot of tests. And in general, my grades only survived because of projects and homeworks. So when it came time for the GMAT, I knew that I needed to do my homework, I needed to study well, and I needed to make sure that I felt as comfortable as possible in the testing environment. What's interesting is that the GMAT is a computer-aided test in which you take it on a computer at the testing center. Everyone puts on, noise-canceling headphones, you just have your screen, everyone's in kind of a private cubicle. So it's very different than a lot of other testing environments that I've been in. Now, in doing my research to prepare for the GMAT, some shocking things I found was a lot of people spend 6 months to a year studying for the single exam. I found that pretty ridiculous. Realistically, most of us don't have 6 months to a year to quit our jobs or quit studying and focus on this one test and spend thousands of dollars for Veritest prep, GMAT prep, some private tutor. And I think that there's a way to take the test in which that most of your points can come from just understanding what the questions are asking for and applying some common sense to it. Largely the tests, especially like integrated reasoning and the essay, is just common sense and a cookie cutter structure. The other thing is that I decided to take it with only 2 weeks left to study. So I basically spent a day just trying to min-max every possible way that I could study for the test, where my effort should best go, how will I best get points. And in the end, I think that actually paid off for me. I went from, I have the numbers here, a 710 on my first practice test after studying a little bit, to a 750, 760, and then I finished with a 790 on my practice test number 4, the highest possible score you can get on a practice test GMAT. And even more so, I did this without paying for any type of textbook, tutoring, online coaching, online course, anything. I literally just did this with free answers from GMAT prep forums, and by just paying for the actual test. The actual test comes with test 1 and 2, and then I paid an extra, I think, $60 for test 3 and 4. So this is basically the cheapest possible way you can study for the GMAT and still try to attain that high of a score. Now, of course, everyone comes in with different levels of knowledge, different, pacing, ways of studying. So this is just how I personally got a 790 on the practice GMAT. I don't think that this will work for everyone necessarily, but hopefully there's some information that people can take away as to how to study efficiently for the GMAT. Because the GMAT is, not your business course or your CS course or your medical test that you were studying for. The GMAT is just a short blip in your life, ideally, and not this 1 year, $5,000 thing. It's literally just the entrance exam to be able to then write your essays, which matter more, and recommendations to get into graduate school. So okay, now let's kind of dive into what was going on in my life and my background and how I got the 790 within 2 weeks. So first off, I was a student at UC Berkeley, so I already had that going for me, that I had a decent understanding of English and math, which is what everything around this test is based upon. Furthermore, I was a computer science major in college, which helps with the integrated reasoning, understanding graphs, and understanding some more of these kind of spatial math problems that are tricky on the GMAT. But I think that despite what the test prep forums or test prep advisors might try to scare people into, saying that there's these very hard, complex math problems or language parts to understand that will just take months and months of solidifying and understanding, there still is a way to tackle the GMAT without even fully knowing what these questions are even about. So first, the test will give you some order that you can take it in. I always did integrated reasoning, verbal, quantitative, and then I took my essay at the end. But I'd actually like to start with the essay first and breaking down how to ace the GMAT. So I've never scored less than the highest possible score on my essay in both the online practice essays, which you can feed into a robot online, some random free websites to auto-grade, and on the actual official grading. So here I've written down what I found about the essay and how to get that highest possible score without even thinking about writing an essay. So first, it will basically give you the same generic style prompt, which if you've done any prep before, you'll know what that is. It will basically ask you to identify the topic, summarize the evidence, and respond to it. You want to list the flaws about the argument in almost every single scenario. There's usually 1 to 2 major flaws, which they expect you to find, and 3 to 5 minor flaws, which are helpful to write your essay with. And these flaws are always of some form of this, and these flaws always follow some sort of cause and effect. And sorry for looking over here, but I'm reading from my notes right now. It will be some cause and effect. So X causes Y when Y occurs, or X causes Y when Y causes X. Or another example is statistics. Or another argument is that, a sample may not be representative of an entire population. We see this a lot in politics, business, anything in our lives. Another thing is an analogy. Sometimes the original question might try to draw a conclusion when there's not enough similarities and they're just basically grasping for straws and they want you to call that out. Some of the random other things you might find are just there's unsubstantiated assumptions, vague words, it ignores supply and demand fundamentals, or there's just the author is drawing a strong conclusion on very weak evidence. So once you find the flaw in the argument, which should be pretty clear, for example, the prompt may go something like this. Johnny drops his ice cream every day on the way home from school. One day, Johnny doesn't drop his ice cream. A car crash occurs. Thus, Johnny dropping his ice cream every day on the way home from school prevents car crashes. Is this argument valid, or is there a flaw in the author's assumption? The GMAT will want you to say there is a flaw in the author's assumption and list the reasons why. And now for the actual essay, you can make an outline and then begin writing from it within that 30-minute time frame that will completely answer what the GMAT wants to see in a very easy to memorize structure once you've drawn those 1 to 2 major points out of the argument. First, you tell them what you plan to say. You tell them you want to paraphrase the argument, you state that it's flawed, and you conclude that the argument says X on Y. However, it fails to X, Y, but also something about Z. Now that structure might sound confusing, but feel free to write it down and process it over a few times in your head. Basically, what you're saying is the author concludes X on some flawed assumption, but they in fact forgot to include not just a proper evaluation of Y, but also some other existential factors, Z. So the next step of the essay is you want to say it and prove it. To do that, I would recommend 2 to 3 paragraphs and a strong conclusion. So what you do is in your first paragraph, you literally just call out the strongest flaw in the argument. And then as you work your way down the essay, they become more and more minor flaws until you finish with the conclusion summarizing it all. So in the first paragraph, second, third, anything tackling these arguments, you might want to just state the biggest flaw, state the example, state maybe a counterexample, indicate why that's a weak extrapolation, and how that might relate. The prompts will probably not be about Johnny and his ice cream, but instead be about, shipping logistics, farming, manufacturing, scientific research, some other type of flaw in the argument. And then in the last paragraph, you want to explain how to strengthen the argument and then evaluate the conclusion. And I always, every single time, wrote this exact sentence. I would recommend that you write this exact sentence too, unless you think of some better way to write it. This sentence is, as it stands, however, the argument is flawed for the reasons indicated. And then you can write either more before or after, but somewhere in the conclusion, I would include that last sentence. That sentence is a strong way of basically stating that, hey, this argument by the author sucks. And now, as you type all of this in both your practice tests or your actual exam, note that I would spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes on the discussion points, 20 minutes actually writing it, and then only 2 to 5 minutes proofreading. So if you find that you're slow at reading or typing, that's something that you actually want to focus on now as you study. Just whether it's reading books, online articles, or proofreading other people's essays, that is something that's very crucial and something that I personally have just written a lot of essays recently, so I'm fine with. Another major note is there are some glaring mistakes to an essay that aren't grammar related necessarily, such as commas or punctuation, but rather don't use I. Don't use I anywhere throughout the essay. Don't say I think they should do this or that, or I think that the argument's author sucks. You want to express it in a professional way as if you were writing some type of business or research document. So feel free to use transition words. Feel free to say the author, the argument, the evidence, but don't say I think anywhere throughout the essay. So once again, to reiterate on the essay, basically the skeleton of the essay should look like an introduction that's 3 to 4 sentences long. It paraphrases the argument and states why it's flawed and concludes X on Y and Z. And then body paragraph 1, which should be the biggest flaw in the argument. Number 2, the second biggest flaw, which will always exist. And then paragraph 3 can be any number of minor points that you find that may or may not exist according to what the GMAT wants to see. And then the conclusion should include, as it stands, the argument is flawed, blah, blah, blah. And what's interesting about this essay is why this structure works is it gives the grader something very easy to see. Only one person grades your essay, and the second point of view grading it is a robot, actually. So basically some type of optimized algorithm to see if the essay seems valid or not. So if you only have a person grading your essay for maybe 30 seconds to a minute and then going on to the next paper, they want to see very clear, easy to read structure. Introduction, first argument, second argument, third argument, conclusion, as it stands, the argument is flawed. This should basically be a guaranteed maximum score on the GMAT for you if you follow these points. Of course, there's no guarantees, but for me personally, I worked on 4 practice tests plus an actual GMAT. So I think that this is a great way to basically compartmentalize the scariness of the essay section, know how you're going to tackle it immediately, and then just toss it aside and focus on the harder vocab, grammar, vocabulary words, and mathematics portions of the exam. So moving on to the quantitative section. What's interesting is it's basically just problem solving, data sufficiency, and doing well on it basically involves pure practice problems. You basically need to go to GMAT form after you get every problem wrong, and then go review that problem, what the topic was about, and see if it was about, ratio problems, scores of 1 through 20, divisibility rules, rates of change, overlapping sets, right triangles or inequalities. And the way the GMAT presents these questions is always, this one is right, this is right, both of them are right, neither are right, or none of the above. And you have to classify if this problem falls into one of those type of sets. Again, I don't really have any specific examples, and I could make a video diving into those specific examples later. But what you want to do is do the tests, do one official GMAT practice test after you buy your admission to the exam. You should go through it entirely blind, see how you score, every problem that you got right and wrong, see what you got right, what seems to be strong in your knowledge, what you got wrong, and then go to some form. Free form, don't pay for anything. Seriously, don't pay for anything. Every question on some past GMAT or practice test or textbook is online in the internet somewhere. You can classify what you got wrong, to what degree was it an easy, medium, or hard problem, and then start quantifying it that way and then actually trying to solidify your understanding. So for example, if I got a problem wrong regarding rate of change, I did maybe 5 to 10 rate of change problems on the form before I felt like I was ready to go on to the next step. And I did this between every practice test. So this is partially why my practice test score improved so rapidly within 2 weeks. But before I get to that, I'm going to touch on one last point about the verbal section, which is the verbal section is basically high school English on steroids. If you've taken the SAT, it's kind of like that. It's basically, misplaced modifiers, dangling sentences, squinting, pronoun verb structures, agreements, all of that beautiful jazz. It's really boring to me, and I think that no matter what I say in this video, what the best way to learn that is to sit down, try the problems yourself, go to a GMAT form like I said again, and then if you don't know any part of an English sentence structure, any part of, the vocabulary or rare words, you should learn that first, do some practice problems before you try to move on. Easy level problems will usually come at the first 10 questions of your exam, and then it'll switch to medium and hard. So the exam is very gameable. It will not throw you the hardest problem initially. You basically want to be consistently getting correct questions on the GMAT. Getting a hard question doesn't mean any more correctness to the exam as an easy question does. As long as you are consistently scoring correct on the questions up until maybe the 20th question, you will score well on the GMAT. I know for sure that I didn't score well on the last few questions of any section on the GMAT, and I still scored a 740 on the actual exam. So, with that said, let's move on to how to basically game the GMAT to score as well as you can within 2 weeks. In my case, I only use 4 practice exams, but I would recommend you use anywhere from 4 to the maximum 6. On the website, you can take each exam once through, and then you can reset them all and then take each one again a second time. So realize that every test you're taking only has 2 possible tries, but once you've taken an exam, you kind of know what to expect and what you got right or wrong in the back of your head. So I didn't redo it at all. I just took 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I was done and went and took the live GMAT 2 days later. So how I view it is the first test you take is your diagnostics test. Take it in a controlled environment, follow the time properly, don't pause it at all, don't Google or look anything up seriously. It's not about how well you want to see yourself score, it's about what you will actually score when you go into the test center. I have friends that have scored above a 700 on that first section. I had friends that scored below a 500 on that section. They followed my advice and all of them got above a 600 at least on the actual exam. And a 600 may not even sound good, or a 700 may not sound good, but from just my advice, they scored that much, while test prep centers will only necessarily guarantee you 30 or 50 points. And you're paying $2,000 to $3,000 to guarantee 30 to 50 points, while you can spend 2 weeks following this method and score like a 100-point increase. So once you've taken your first diagnostics test, follow what I said earlier in the video, go through every problem, see what you did right or wrong, quantify them, write it down in some Excel spreadsheet or some note document like I have here, and really keep track of your progress every single day. This should take about 3 hours a day to do test day prep on days that you're not taking the GMAT practice exam online, which should be, every few days or whenever you feel comfortable. You should be spending all of that time on just practice problems. Now, I don't think I spent any really full day studying for this, because I studied for this while I was taking a full load of college classes, working a job as a teacher, and managing the rest of my life. But you need a solid 3 hours a day for 2 weeks to actually feel solid about the material. So after maybe 6 to 10 hours of prep after your first diagnostics test, you should feel confident on the easy level questions for sure. You don't have to worry so much about the medium or hard. And if you don't understand some really obscure problem with prime numbers or some obscure vocabulary word, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. Those questions won't kill your score. But what will kill your score is not acing the easy level questions. So as you come into test number 2, realize that what matters is my consistency. Can I get my easy level questions out like that? Am I doing them on time well? Am I struggling with them or feeling unsure about myself? And if you are, you need to focus on fixing that before you take 3 or 4 for sure. From what I did with that method between test number 1 and 2, I saw a score increase of 40 points. I went from a 36 on my verbal to a 45 on my verbal. That was the biggest jump because I was questioning myself about basic concepts in English. Of course, I've spoken English all my life. I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to a good school. But you don't really know the rules of English until you explicitly try to look them up in a dictionary or are tested about them in some standardized tests. I didn't even quite follow my own advice between test number 2 and 3. And I just kind of, goofed around a little bit, thought, a 750 is good enough. Let's just study a little bit and try it again. And what I ended up getting was I got a 760. My math improved a little bit. My English stayed the same. And that's fine. But a 760 on a practice test will probably mean that you lose 40 to 50 points on the real exam from just, the exam is different. The committee that runs the GMAT will be always changing the exam to try to make sure that it's not as hackable as I say it is. So you will lose 40 to 50 points on the actual exam from stress, using the bathroom, just not being familiar, the test change or whatever. That's fine. But knowing that I would probably lose 40 to 50 points, I didn't think a 760 was enough for me to feel comfortable with where I wanted to get in for college. So I buckled down. I followed my advice to myself again really hard. And I spent maybe a week studying on GMAT forms only. And then I retook the test again for the last time. Again, I took this all in a controlled environment, noise canceling headphones on in my apartment. I didn't let anyone disturb me. I didn't have any other tabs. I just full screened the window and focused on this practice GMAT. And what I ended up getting was, funny enough, a 7 on the integrated reasoning. So it actually dropped 1 point. But I scored a 49 on the verbal and a 51 on the quantitative, which is extremely high. I think you can only score 1 point higher on the quantitative. And I scored a total for a 790. And as far as I've seen, that's the highest possible score attainable on a GMAT practice test. People who say they have gotten 800s have been disproven by the actual GMAT committee, as 800 shouldn't be a truly attainable score. The intention of the exam is just to not be 100% solvable, and you should always get at least one question wrong. Otherwise, the exam is too easy, according to the committee. Knowing that I had a 790, I felt confident, right? I couldn't go higher. I could just keep taking tests to see if that was consistent. And if you have time, I recommend you do that too. But I just simply didn't have time. I had to focus on my classes that were staggering, or my relationships, or just working out. So I decided that that was enough. I was happy with my score. I felt confident enough, and I went to take in the test. And I will talk about taking the test and what it was actually like to take the test, and why my score did drop 50 points between my practice at home and live at the test center. But that will be my next video, so stay tuned. If anything in this video was confusing, I'll try to address it in the comments or in a follow-up video maybe after this first video about practice tests, my second video about the live exam, and I'll probably do a third video about why I decided not to go pursue an MBA in the end. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, post that in this or the subsequent videos, and then I'll make a Q&A video or host some type of Q&A session about this. So thank you for watching. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and good luck with studying if you're watching this video. Peace.